shall begin this report, which I will name Portrait of Disaster, which began for me on August 20th, 1969. I slept late this morning because I had been working fairly hard. This was my first morning I could sleep late. At about 8 o'clock, I was called back to duty. I was not given any information at the time as to why I was being called back, just being called back to duty. I turned my police radio on en route back to my home to change into my uniform and pick up my police car. And in listening to the traffic as I continued towards home, I realized that we had something very big going on. We had at this time, an unestimated amount of rain in the Nelson County area and the northern edge of Amherst County. And the rivers had risen to to a height that had been unheard of before. I proceeded north to the Buffalo River, which is the first river north of Amherst, and the water at that location was approximately 4 foot over top of the bridge, which is probably 40 foot from the riverbed, which is something that has never been heard of at this location before. After handling several small assignments, I was sent east to try to find some route across the James River. I proceeded east, and at each bridge I got to, the river had risen to a point or washed out the approaches to it where I could not cross the bridge until I got to Bremo Bluff, which is approximately 45 miles east of Amherst on Route 15. At this location, the lieutenant informed me to come on north of the river and proceed back towards Livingston, that they could use more men north of the river. I could not get into Livingston. After finding this out, I went through Charlottesville on 250 and up to the Skyline Drive and continued south from that location, where I ran into a landslide on the parkway, which they estimated would take them 3 weeks to move. I still had not got to the point that I could see the immediate disaster or damage to the Nelson County area. I'd only seen water in the James River at points and places that had never been heard of at this height before. The radio also informed that Richmond and all the lower points were prepared for a flood level which they had never reached before. After going down the parkway for some distance to Route 56, I arrived at this location by going back down into the valley through Sharando and back through secondary roads. And I learned by making this detour to it to get around the landslide some of the damage that was occurring. I drove up roads for 2 and 3 miles which had been washed completely out, no longer even resembled being a road. I was seeing some of the slides on the west side of the Blue Ridge at this time. My sergeant informed me that I could check down Route 56 coming in towards Cairo above the Masses Mill area, which had been, at the time, we thought damaged worse than any other section of the county. I came down approximately 3 miles till I came to a area where the road had washed out and could continue no further. I went back to the parkway and came into the upper end of Amherst County and was again cut off by a road that was washed out, so that I was forced to come back over to Route 60 at the top of the mountain. I continued east on Route 60 until I found Route 60 washed out at the Buffalo River, approximately 8 miles west of Amherst. I had enough secondary roads which were still passable to come back into 130 and on to 29 and eventually back to the Amherst Circle. While in the Madison Heights area, I decided to have supper, so I came out the next morning at 6 o'clock. I proceeded into areas of our county which I had thought about the night before, which might need to be checked, which had not been checked the day before. After checking several routes into this area, determined them to be washed out. I continued on into the Mash's Mill area, coming in over secondary roads, at which point through this area I could see the mountains surrounding the Mash's Mill area, and I was getting some idea then of what massive damage we'd had. Every low spot in the mountains had washed out from the very top of the mountain down, which would indicate a terrific amount of rain involved, water involved. Later estimates placed this at between 14 and 16 inches of rain within a 4-hour period. I continued into the Mash's Mill area where the death toll had not been counted at this time. The water was just beginning to recede, so there could be some count or location of the bodies and missing made. This was a community of approximately 40 houses and buildings. There were only 2 that were undamaged enough so that they could be lived in. While at this location, I informed the sergeant of my desire to go into a section of Amherst County and check this, which he was agreeable on, that it should be checked, and we lined up a rescue squad or search team to go into it. Coming back from Mash's Mill into Piney River, I had picked up 2 boys, 114 and 116. This is all that remained of a family of 7 that was living in the immediate area of Mash's Mill. 14-year-old boy, in telling the story coming back, said they had gone to bed and his father had woke him up when he realized that the water was getting up around the house. They had gotten into their car, the whole family, and started away when the car flooded out. They all got out of the car and tried to get back to the house. The water was rising so fast that they were all swept away. And the 2 boys that survived, 14 and the 16-year-old, hung on to trees for somewhere between 12, 15 hours until they were rescued by the helicopters and rescue teams that came in early the next morning. In all of this tragedy, it gave me a real good feeling to realize that in the midst of this, I was talking to this 14-year-old. He did not want to leave the scene. He was concerned about staying on the scene and making funeral arrangements for his mother and father and the other 3 brothers and sisters. It was quite heartening to realize that somebody as young as this would be concerned about such things as this. However, the bodies that had been located to the family had been brought out, so it was determined that we would bring the 2 boys on out, which I did, and they were taken in by the grandmother and grandfather. I picked up the rescue team, a search team that I was to pick up at Piney River, and we continued up through Lowesville and on up the Piney River through Woodson and on up to the higher points in the mountain. At first I thought this would be somewhat of a dull trip that we were taking, which covered approximately 11 miles. But after getting approximately 5 miles into this area, we came to the small community of Woodson. And as we approached it, we talked to several individuals and informed them that the road was out on both sides of Woodson, that there would probably be some time before rescue vehicles could come in, and if they did not have facilities for cooking or water to drink, that would be a good idea if they left and came on into Amherst to the evacuation centers. At one location, we left the highway and walked across to a elderly woman's house, which turned out to be one of the most touching moments of the whole time up till now. The woman was sitting on the front porch of a big old house which she was living in by herself. And as we approached, she got up and came to the screen and told us how glad she was to see us. She was informed that her condition, as far as getting food into her and water, and that she could go out. I observed at this time that she had been sitting on the front porch reading the Bible, which was very touching to me. The house itself had approximately 6 inches of water over the floor, and in talking to her, she had had nothing to eat since the storm had hit, which was probably 36 hours before. She said she had been cooking or trying to get 2 hamburgers cooked on a little heater stove that she had found enough dry wood to get hot that morning, and thought she had had them good enough to cook by now. I informed her that we could take care of getting her out by helicopter, and she was very appreciative of this, at which time she became very emotional and cried, thanking us so much for coming in and taking so much time with us, and just thinking about it. As we left, I asked her, would it be all right if we picked a few grapes, which she had quite a vineyard beside the house, and she said yes, we could. And if we were hungry, she's sorry she hadn't offered us the 2 hamburgers, that we could have those, at which, of course, we turned down. If nothing else is done that appears to be worthwhile by myself while this disaster is being cleared out, this one incident has made it worthwhile. We continued on through Woodson, located 4 or 5 other people which were evacuated at the same time that this woman was, on up to the head of the river, which had approximately 12 people which needed to be evacuated. Arrangements were made so I could pick them up on the morning following, which would be on Friday, by helicopter, and take them into the evacuation centers. On our way up from Woodson, we had contacted 2 people that were going in to check on part of the family. They were going the opposite direction and had come in from the road over top of the mountain. I worked out a trade with them. If they were going on through, we would get the keys from them, bring our team around the mountain, and meet them back below Woodson, and save them walking back after the truck and save us walking back to our cars, which worked out real well. After coming on back and making a trade with the truck, getting the people back to that truck and having everything lined up for the next day, I terminated a day which had covered approximately 16 hours. At this time, we had 56 people missing and 26 dead known. Friday, August the 22nd, I proceeded to the Lovingston area where we had a control point set up, which eventually was called Control. From this location, I was dispatched with a helicopter into the area I'd covered the day before, where we picked up approximately 12 people. We also checked in Woodson on the way back out, and the woman who ran the store there, who was an invalid and traveled in a wheelchair around the store, was talked into leaving, which we felt would be best, and she realized it after we brought her out. Of course, she insisted on being carried out in a wheelchair to the helicopter and loaded this way and hauled all the way into the high school in a wheelchair. During these trips that I was making in the helicopter at this time, it was brought very vividly to my imagination and my vision as to how much damage had occurred. This area, the Blue Ridge, apparently had immense rain dropped right on top of it. And every gully, every little valley, every low spot in the mountain had been washed out as if some giant claw had grabbed hold of it and pulled everything out of it. This was washed all the way down to solid rock, everything gone. And as this built up going down the mountain into the streams and rivers and on into the larger rivers, it carried everything with it. Highways, roads, people, houses, cars, trucks. In one area alone, we lost 2 tractor and trailers completely, which up to this time had been unaccounted for altogether. There have been others that have been recovered, but we have 2 that have completely disappeared from the face of the earth. After taking care of the people that we had brought out, during the rest of the day, I made several flights in helicopters to various locations in the county for assistance. At the end of this day, we had 96 missing and 36 known dead. Saturday, August the 23rd, I was back again at control, operating out of the control area with helicopters. This morning when I came to work, I passed Buffalo River and observed that downriver from a concrete plant located just north of it, just west of it rather, that 4 concrete mixers had been picked up and carried downstream, and 3 of them were practically buried in the mud that had come downriver. In the past couple of days, I have had an opportunity to drive north on 29 to the Woods Mill area, which is completely washed out for a distance of a half a mile. Every field coming down out of the mountains where the road had crossed, the valleys coming down out of the mountains were completely filled, some of them to a depth of 30 and 40 and 50 feet with mud. At one particular location, there was a row of houses across off of 29. As the water and mud and debris and trees came down through it, it picked up 3 of them and buried them. I understand, this was not confirmed, I understand that there are 9 people missing there. These people will never be located because they're buried in too much debris to ever be located. It would appear, in looking at all this damage, that some mighty hand had just reached down into a area and picked things up and tossed them around and then washed it down with a fire hose. I had an occasion on this day to take a helicopter with some dignitaries in it over the county area. They were very impressed and visibly touched by what they'd seen. The day before, the governor had been up, and he was visibly touched when he come back by what he'd seen, to the point of very visible tears in his eyes. This is the general feeling for everybody involved in this. organization here is working fine. I don't know what we'd do without the local people. A lot of them have families that are missing, and they're working right hand in hand, 16, 18 hours a day to help the search teams go into the area and try to locate where the houses were and possibly determine how many people are missing. I have one man who I have worked with 2 or 3 times already who has a brother and sister-in-law who is missing. I've been out on missions where we picked up bodies, and I feel sure that he is very hesitant to have to go on these, but he doesn't show it. We have young people that are coming in that doing tremendous work on these search teams. It's good to see people with such organization, with such tragedy around them. At the end of this day, we have 47 known dead, 47 dead that have been identified, rather. 4 dead which are unidentified, and 91 missing. We seem to continue having the missing rate rise and the death rate rise too. Sunday, August the 24th, I have been assigned to the radio control at the control center. This is for the state police, which involves taking all calls and relaying all calls we have from our post to the civil defense post on the county and state basis. It's very obvious at this time that the past 4 days of 18 and 20-hour days are beginning to show on quite a few people involved. Temples are cut pretty thin, and people are saying a lot of things they'll probably regret later, but it hadn't gone too bad. At the end of this day, we have 50 dead that have been identified. We have 5 unknown dead. We have 101 missing. Monday, August the 25th, this is my 6th day now, in excess of 16 hours. I'm operating the radio again. Our crew has been cut down to just 2 men, myself and another trooper. They'll investigate at this location. Our job now seems to be mainly operating in the outlying areas and cutting off the traffic that's coming in. I can understand that people wanted to come in and visit their families, but I will probably never understand the curiosity seekers that want to come in and see the area that has been destroyed by the flood. Apparently we're doing a pretty good job because the traffic within the area is cut down considerably. At this time we have practically all the main roads open and quite a few of the secondary roads. However, Route 29 north of our location in the Woods Mill area will be out for another 10 days or 2 weeks. Again, it's just hard to believe that the damage that I am looking at, the damage I've seen, the damage I've flown over and walked through could be so great and so extensive. My honest feelings are that there could never be an accurate description or record in the history books as to what goes on here and what has gone on here, except what is seen by my eyes and the eyes of the people that have been in it. Pictures will show part of it, words will tell part of it, but it will never be accurately described or made a part of history, except by the people that looked at it. If I record this now and tell it later, it'll never be as great as what it has been by looking at it. I'm making this recording day by day just to keep a running record of what goes on in my portrait of a disaster. August 26, 1969, evening. It's been exactly 7 days now since the rain started that brought the earth down, trees down, and caused the disaster that we're speaking of. 7 days. 2 or 3 days after this first happened a week ago, people were talking about leaving. There were rumors that whole communities were going to leave the county after what had happened. I'm very happy to say that on this day, the rumors and what people are actually doing wouldn't bear this out. So far, I don't know of any family that has left because of the rain, because of the disaster. The people now are talking about getting the crops in, what they have left, saving what they can, and where they're going to rebuild. This is good. This is the thing that bears out to the truth that the people here were not just cowards such as this. They're not going to leave. You can't run them out. In fact, we've had one woman who'd been living at her location for 74 years, and she wouldn't even come out to take her shots. So I don't think anything much is going to change other than the face of the earth and some people dying. The death count at this time, 62 dead, 88 missing. This missing count now has dropped quite a bit more than the dead has climbed, which is a good sign because some of the missing are turning up. We turned up one today that had been working on search crew for 5 days. So these kind of mistakes and errors and overlooks are happy overlooks. However, the ones that are being brought in now, some of them may never be identified due to the time that has passed since they've been dead. Of course, a lot of them will never be found. A lot of them will stay buried in the mud, on the trees, and probably some will have washed all the way to the ocean. But back where all this began, people are talking about if I could just find this member of my family and bury them so that I know that they're buried. I could put a monument or a marker where they are. In my looking at the mountains, I can't think of a more fitting monument or a more permanent monument. And looking up the sides and faces of these mountains, it's where the great slides have come down and exposing the solid rock for distances of 200 and 300 feet wide all the way to the top of the mountain. This is something that will outlast any monument that any person on this earth could put out now. So my feeling is if part of my family was buried under this mass of trees and dirt, I feel like it would have been buried good and a monument erected, which would be much better than anything I could do. This is the thought I have in mind as we end the 7th day and first week in my report on a portrait of a disaster. been 12 days now since the flood. We got quite a lot of extra searchers over the Labor Day weekend, which we're going through. So yesterday we recovered 6 bodies, and today we have recovered 8. Identification is being held up quite a bit now due to the condition of the bodies. Everybody involved at the point that I'm located at control, has gotten just about to the point of being what you would consider slap happy. Everybody's getting so tired you either have to laugh or cry or crack up, I guess. But things are going on, and we think that possibly in another couple of days we can take down our operation, which will leave us with 30 to 40 bodies missing, which will probably never be found. So things go ahead. Talked to a preacher today who last Sunday, I have found out now, went to church in his work clothes and boots. I know him from seeing him go out on so many of the missions when they're picking up bodies. And last Sunday, he went into church with his work clothes and boots on. Had about 25 people in church, and told them we wouldn't be in the sermon this morning. They had work to do, so all they'd have to do is get the clothes and get the work clothes and meet him outside, and he'd put them to work, which is what they did. This is the kind of spirit the whole community is operating on right now. That's the way things are on August 31st, 12th day into the flood. Tuesday, September the 2nd. This is the first day that we have not had search teams out in large numbers. We did not recover any bodies today. However, during the weekend we recovered 20. I feel like now at the command post that this is possibly the most that we will find. Maybe some others will come to light as the construction crews clean out the debris and all from bridges. So this afternoon, we moved our armored car, which we've been using as our command post, back to Appomattox. And my job from now on will be working with Investigator Jones in helping to identify what we have. Unless something new comes to light, this will be all I'll have put down on this, my portrait of a disaster.
Bye.